Diana, she called from the gloom. I smothered a sigh and stopped. Hi, Gillian. Unaccountably possessive of my hoard of manuscripts, I remained as far from the witch as possible and angled my body so they weren't in her line of sight. What are you doing for Mabon? Gillian was always stopping by my desk to ask me to spend time with my sisters when I was in town. With the Wiccan celebrations of the autumn equinox just days away, she was redoubling her efforts to bring me into the Oxford coven. Working, I said promptly. There are some very nice witches here, you know, Gillian said, with prime disapproval. You really should join us on Monday. Thanks, I'll think about it, I said, already moving in the direction of the Selden End, the airy 17th century edition that ran perpendicular to the main axis of Duke Humphreys. I'm working on a conference paper, though, so don't count on it. My Aunt Sarah had always warned me it wasn't possible for one witch to lie to another, but that hadn't stopped me from trying. Gillian made a sympathetic noise, but her eyes followed me. Back at my familiar seat facing the arch-leaded windows, I resisted the temptation to dump the manuscripts on the table and wipe my hands. Instead, mindful of the rage, I lowered the stack carefully. The manuscript that appeared to tug at its call slip lay on the top of the pile. Stamped in gilt on the spine was a coat of arms belonging to Elias Ashmole, a 17th century book collector and alchemist whose books and papers had come to the Bodleian from the Ashmolean Museum in the 19th century, along with the number 782. I reached out, touching the brown leather. A mild shock made me withdraw my fingers quickly, but not quickly enough. The tingling traveled up my arms, lifting my skin into tiny goose pimples, then spread across my shoulders, tensing the muscles in my back and neck. These sensations quickly receded, but they left behind a hollow feeling of unmet desire. Shaken by my response, I stepped away from the library table. Even at a safe distance, this manuscript was challenging to me, threatening the walls I erected to separate my career as a scholar from my birthright as the last of the bishop witches. Here, with my hard-earned doctorate, tenure, and promotions in hand, and my career beginning to blossom, I denounced my family's heritage and created a life that depended on reason and scholarly abilities, not inexplicable hunches and spells. I was in Oxford to complete a research project. Upon its conclusion, my findings would be published, substantiated with the extensive analysis and footnotes and presented to human colleagues, leaving no room for mysteries and no place in my work for what could be known only through a witch's sixth sense. But albeit unwittingly, I had called upon an alchemical manuscript that I needed for my research and that also seemed to possess an otherworldly power that was impossible to ignore. My fingers itched to open it and learn more. Yet an even stronger impulse held me back. Was my curiosity intellectual, related to my scholarship? Or did it have to do with my family's connection to witchcraft? I drew the library's familiar air into my lungs and shut my eyes, hoping that it would bring clarity. The Bodleian had always been a sanctuary to me, a place unassociated with the bishops, tucking my shaking hands under my elbows. I stared at Ashmole 782 in the glowing twilight and wondered what to do. My mother would have instinctively have known the answer, had she been standing in my place. Most members of the Bishop family were talented witches, but my mother, Rebecca, was special. Everyone said so. Her supernatural abilities had manifested early, and by the time she was in grade school she could outmagic most of the senior witches in the local coven with her intuitive understanding of spells, startling foresight, and uncanny knack for seeing beneath the surface of people and events. My mother's younger sister, my Aunt Sarah, was a skilled witch, too, but her talents were more mainstream. A deft hand with potions, a perfect command of witchcraft's traditional lore spells and charms. My fellow historians didn't know about the family, of course, but everyone in Madison, the remote town, and upstate New York where I lived with Sarah since the age of 17, knew all about the Bishops. My ancestors had moved from Massachusetts after the Revolutionary War. By then, more than a century had passed since Bridget Bishop was executed at Salem. Even so, rumors and gossip followed them to their new home. After pulling up stakes and resettling in Madison, the Bishops worked hard to demonstrate how useful it would be to have witchy neighbors for healing the sick and predicting the weather. In time, the family set down roots in the community deep enough to withstand the inevitable outbreaks of superstition and human fear. But my mother had a curiosity about the world that led her beyond the safety of Madison. She went first to Harvard, where she met a young wizard named Stephen Proctor. He also had a long magical lineage and desired to experience life outside the scope of his family's New England history and influence. Rebecca Bishop and Stephen Proctor were a charming couple. My mother's all-American frankness, a counterpoint to my father's more formal, old-fashioned ways. They became anthropologists, immersing themselves in foreign cultures and beliefs, sharing their intellectual passions along with deep devotion to each other. After securing positions on the faculty area in schools, my mother at her alma mater, my father at Wesley, they made research trips abroad and made home for the new family in Cambridge. I have a few memories of my childhood, but each one is vivid and surprisingly clear. I'll feature my parents. The feel of corduroy in my father's elbows, the lily of the valley that scented my mother's perfume, the clink of their wine glasses on Friday nights when they put me to bed and dine. Together, by candlelight, my mother told me bedtime stories, and my father's brown briefcase clattered when it dropped by the front door. These memories would strike a familiar chord with most people.